Arguments are everywhere you look. And I think most of us probably feel like all arguments are bad. I mean, conflicts don't usually make us feel the greatest. And they can be really difficult and uncomfortable to have. In fact, I think most of us try to avoid arguing if we can, right? We may have strong opinions about things, but we don't argue them because we want to fit in and not stand out. We don't want to offend anyone or make someone upset. But here's the thing, not all arguments are bad. Arguing can actually be good if it's done the right way, that's healthy and respectful. That's why I think it's an important subject to talk about, because if we don't learn how to argue in a healthy way, the quality of our relationships with our friends, our family members, our teammates, the people in our small group, and pretty much everyone we come into contact with is on the line. You see, conflict is a part of life. And that's because relationships are a part of life. Whether it's a friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a classmate, a parent, a sibling, a coach, someone in your small group, or a random person on social media, at some point, you're gonna come into conflict. And in other words, you're gonna argue. And that can be challenging for a lot of reasons. For starters, feelings are usually involved. People don't usually fight over something they don't care about. A lot of times, we simply argue because we care a lot about what we're arguing about. Or we care about who we're arguing with. You don't want to see your friend make a bad choice. You don't want your girlfriend to break up with you, and you don't want your older sibling to talk to you that way. So you argue. Not because you want to, but because you care that much about the other person. So what do? Well, sometimes we avoid the person altogether. We don't talk to them, we ghost them, we completely disappear. We hope eventually the hurt feelings or reasons that we argued will disappear too. Or maybe we do talk about it, just not to them. Instead of talking to that person that we've argued with, we talk to everybody else. But that can really get us into some trouble and not solving the issue, can't it? I think one of the biggest reasons arguments can be challenging to navigate is this. The other person thinks differently than we do. Regardless of who is arguing, usually this is what happens. Instead of listening to what someone else has to say, or talking about it calmly, or about our viewpoint, or even ignoring them altogether, we jump right into an argument. Why? Because honestly, we can't understand how they could think differently than we do. So what do? We spend our energy trying to convince them that we're right. After all, isn't that the whole point of an argument? To prove your point? To get the other person to come to your side? To win? To be right? See, I think the biggest problem that we have when it comes to the way that we navigate an argument is that we feel there has to be a winner and a loser. And I don't know about you, but I definitely don't like to lose. That's the mindset a lot of us have when it comes to arguments. We want to win. We want to be right, and it doesn't matter what we have to say or do to make sure that in the end of it, we come out on top. But if that's the problem that's holding us back, what if arguing to win isn't really a win at all? What if trying to be right actually isn't right? Today, we're going to look at a verse from the New Testament of the Bible written by Jesus' half-brother James. James wrote a letter to a group of Christians in the early church, and there's some wisdom that's an absolute game changer when it comes to how we handle arguments. Check this out. Notice the word James used here, everyone. So basically, James came out of the gate saying, what I'm about to tell you, it's for everyone. Not just for the people that I agree with, not just for the people who think that they're right, not just for the people with the biggest tempers or the most passionate voices. This is for all of us. The message is for everyone, but it's especially important for those of us who believe in Jesus. As followers, this is how we're supposed to communicate with other people. So what do we do when we don't know what we're supposed to do? First, he told us to be quick to listen. In other words, when you find yourself in an argument, listen first. Do your best to hold off from speaking until you've actually made an effort to listen, to hear what the person is saying. James followed that by telling us to be slow to speak. Now, for some of us, this is particularly difficult. We want to speak what's on our minds all the time, but especially in an argument. We thought of not saying what we think or feel. That's just crazy. But remember how slow to speak doesn't mean saying no to speaking? It doesn't mean that we just sit back and take it. James wasn't asking us to not defend ourselves or our points of view. Instead, he was asking us to pause before we do, to think before we speak. I don't know about you, but in my experience, most of the things I regretted in arguments are things that I said without thinking about them first. Taking a minute to pause, choosing to be slow to speak, could be the answer to that. If James were writing this letter today, then he might also include be slow to text, be slow to post, be slow to comment, slow to talk behind someone's back. Whatever the response may be for you, pause and think about it before you actually do it. All of this really adds up to the final thing James wrote here. Be slow to become angry. After all, we aren't usually arguing because we're angry. James wasn't asking us to not be angry. He wasn't asking us to ignore our feelings, but he was asking us to lead with another feeling, a stronger feeling. In our arguments, this feeling is love. Choosing to be slow to become angry means we're choosing to love when we want to hate. It means focusing on the person, not the point that we're trying to make. It means valuing the relationship more than being right. In other words, when we argue, I think we need to remember this. Care more about the person you're arguing with than the point that you're trying to make. Listen, arguing happens. It's a part of life. But how it turns out really depends on how we choose to handle it. So next time you find yourself in a position to argue, what would it look like for you to care more about the person you're arguing with than the point that you're trying to make? What would it look like for you to try some of what James was talking about here? To be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. I think if you do, you'll find that the way you argue and the way you feel will both change for the better. Of course, I know this isn't always easy. So try a few things this week to get started. First, memorize this verse. Really commit James 1:19 to memory. Trust me, it's important. You want this to be in your brain, ready to go the next time you find yourself about to argue. Second, apply it to someone. Think about the person in your world who needs you to actually follow James's instructions when it comes to arguing. Who do you find yourself tempted to argue with often? Someone in your family, a friend, a kid on your team? In your mind, put their face next to this verse. And third, put yourself in their shoes. This is the toughest one, I know. But I want to challenge you to see more in that person than just your differences, your argument, and your stance. I want you to try and see and understand their side. It doesn't mean you'll always agree with what they think, but it does mean you'll try to understand why they think that. It means you will try to understand them. Remember, care more about the person you're arguing with than the point that you're trying to make. Now, as we end this lesson, I want you to think about this question. When I argue, do I argue to win or to understand?